Welcome to the channel today. We journey into the life of Alexander the Great, the young Macedonian king who conquered the Persian Empire and forged one of the largest realms the ancient world had ever seen. This is the story of his rise and the empire he built in the northern reaches of the Greek world, beyond the polished marble temples of Athens and the disciplined barracks of Sparta. There lay a rugged kingdom of horsemen and highland warriors. This was Macedon, a land of sweeping plains, thick forests and mountain strongholds often dismissed by southern Greeks as semi-barbaric, backward and provincial. Yet from this frontier kingdom would emerge a man who would redraw the map of the ancient world. His name was Alexander the Great before. He conquered Persia before he crossed into Egypt and marched toward India. He was simply Alexander of Macedon, heir to a throne forged in blood and ambition, a kingdom on the edge in the mid-4th century. BC Macedon was a rising power, but not yet a dominant one. Its neighbors, the Greek city-states to the south and Thracian tribes to the north, regarded it with suspicion. The transformation of Macedon began not with Alexander, but with his father. Philip II of Macedon ascended the throne in 359 BC at a moment of crisis. The kingdom was threatened by internal instability and foreign invasion. Philip responded not merely with courage but with innovation. He reformed the army. He lengthened the traditional Greek spear into the sarissa, a pike. Up to 18 feet long, he reorganized infantry into dense formations that could present an impenetrable hedge of spear points. He strengthened cavalry, particularly the elite companion cavalry, transforming it into a decisive shock force through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and calculated warfare. Philip subdued rival Greek states and established Macedonian hegemony over much of Greece after his decisive victory at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCBY, the time of his death. Philip had achieved what no Greek leader had done before he united the fractious Greek world under his leadership, at least in military terms, and he had a greater vision. He intended to invade the vast Achaemenid Empire. He did not live to see it. The birth of a conqueror, Alexander, was born in 356 BC in Pella, the Macedonian capital. From childhood, he was surrounded by ambition and expectation. His mother, Olympias, instilled in him a belief in divine destiny. She traced his lineage to Achilles, the hero of Homer's Iliad. His father ensured he received the finest education available in the Greek world. For a time, his tutor was none other than Aristotle under Aristotle's guidance. Alexander studied philosophy, science, literature, and medicine. He absorbed Homer's epics and reportedly kept a copy of the Iliad under his pillow during campaigns. But Alexander was not shaped by books alone. At 16, he served as regent while Philip campaigned abroad. At 18, he commanded cavalry at Chaeronea, leading a decisive charge that shattered the sacred band of Thebes. He learned early that boldness could change the course of battle. A sudden crown in 336 BC, Philip II was assassinated during a public celebration. The motives remain debated: court intrigue, political resentment, or personal vendetta, but the result was immediate. At just 20 years old, Alexander became king. The transition was perilous. Rivals emerged. Greek cities sensed opportunity for revolt. Northern tribes tested Macedonian strength. Alexander acted swiftly and ruthlessly. Potential claimants to the throne were eliminated. Rebellious cities were subdued. When Thebes rose against him in 335 BC, Alexander marched south with astonishing speed. The city was destroyed. Thousands were killed or enslaved. The message was unmistakable. Resistance would be crushed. Greece submitted. Now the young king turned his gaze eastward toward the empire his father had planned to conquer, the Persian horizon. The Achaemenid Empire was still the largest political entity on earth. It stretched from the Aegean coast to the Indus River. Its wealth was immense. Its manpower vast. Its king was Darius III. To many observers, Alexander's ambition seemed reckless. Macedon was powerful but small compared to Persia. The key invasion would require crossing the Hellespont into Asia Minor, into lands long controlled by Persian satraps in 334 BC. Alexander did exactly that, with roughly 3,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. He stepped onto Asian soil. According to tradition, he cast a spear into the ground and declared Asia won by the spear. It was a theatrical gesture, but it signaled something deeper. Alexander did not intend a raid. He intended an empire, and the first clash would come soon on the banks of a river where Macedonian discipline would meet Persian numbers for the first time. The world was about to witness the rise of a conqueror, unlike any before him. When Alexander the Great crossed into Asia, in 334 BC, he did not command a massive army by Persian standards. He commanded something far more dangerous, a professional, battle-hardened, highly disciplined war machine refined over decades by his father Philip II of Macedon. But armies are not just numbers, they are reflections of the men who lead them, and in this campaign, two radically different monarchs would shape the fate of continent's Alexander king in the front line. Alexander did not rule from a distant throne. He fought in the front ranks. Unlike many monarchs of his era, he personally led cavalry charges, exposed himself to arrows and spears, and endured the same heat, dust, and exhaustion as his men. This created not only loyalty, but devotion. His leadership style combined charisma, calculated boldness, and relentless speed. He believed in decisive engagement. Delay to him was often a greater danger than risk. He also understood symbolism. Before crossing into Asia, he visited the legendary city of Troy and paid homage at what was believed to be the tomb of Achilles. He consciously styled himself as a new, Homeric hero. This blending of myth and ambition would define his image both to his soldiers and to his enemies. The Macedonian army, Alexander's core strength, lay in the Macedonian phalanx. These infantrymen carried the sarissa, a pike up to 5 or 6 meters long. When arrayed in formation, the first 5 ranks could project spear points forward simultaneously, creating a bristling wall nearly impossible to penetrate frontally. The phalanx was not designed for independent maneuver. It was the anvil. The hammer was the companion cavalry drawn from Macedonian nobility, heavily armored and mounted on powerful horses. The companions fought in wedge formation. Alexander often placed himself at their head. Their purpose was not attrition, but decisive breakthrough. Supporting units included hypaspists, elite infantry capable of flexible movement, Thessalian cavalry, skilled horsemen guarding the flanks, allied Greek contingents, light troops and archers recruited from various regions. Total. Alexander began his campaign with approximately 4,000 men compared to Persia. This was a modest force, but it was unified by language training and shared purpose logistics of conquest. Invading the Achaemenid Empire required more than bravery supply. Lines stretched across the Hellespont, grain, weapons, medical supplies, engineers, all had to be transported through hostile territory. Alexander carried limited funds at the outset. In fact, he was heavily indebted. His campaign would need to sustain itself through conquest. Each captured treasury would finance the next advance. This created momentum. He could not afford stagnation. Victory was not merely glory. It was economic necessity. Darius III, King of Kings, opposing Alexander, was Darius III. Darius had come to the throne amid internal instability. Though a legitimate royal relative, he lacked the towering prestige of earlier Achaemenid rulers like Cyrus or Xerxes. Yet Persia remained formidable. Its strength lay in scale. The empire was divided into satrapies, administrative provinces governed by satraps who commanded local troops and resources. When war came, Darius could summon forces from across Asia, Minor Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond. His army was multinational, and vast Persian warfare emphasized mobility, archery, and cavalry dominance. Scythed chariots equipped with blades extending from their wheels were designed to tear through enemy infantry formations. Persian cavalry, especially from eastern provinces, were highly skilled. Darius initially delegated resistance to local satraps in Asia Minor. He underestimated the young Macedonian king. That miscalculation would prove costly. The first collision approaches in 334 BC. Persian satraps gathered their forces near the river Granicus. In Asia Minor, they believed the river crossing would halt Alexander's advance. They believed a young king would hesitate before attacking across water against prepared cavalry. They did not yet understand Alexander's temperament. Alexander preferred to strike before his enemy consolidated. He preferred shock over delay, and so instead of waiting for reinforcements, he ordered an immediate assault across the river. A decision many of his own generals considered reckless. If he fell in that first encounter, the invasion would collapse instantly. There was no second-in-command capable of sustaining the vision. As the Macedonian army approached the riverbanks, Persian cavalry lined the opposite shore. The water shimmered under the sun between two empires stood a current of mud and blood waiting to be stirred. The rise of Alexander would begin not with caution, but with audacity, and the first charge would decide whether history would remember him as a fool or as a conqueror before the great. Battles of the campaign were decided at the Granicus, at Issus, at Gaugamela. Victory was already encoded in wood, bronze, iron, and discipline. Alexander's conquests were not accidents of courage alone. They were products of military evolution. The sarissa engine of the phalanx. At the heart of the Macedonian infantry stood the sarissa. Unlike the shorter hoplite spear used by earlier Greek armies, the sarissa stretched up to 5 or 6 meters in length. Crafted from tough cornel wood and tipped with iron at both ends, it required 2 hands to wield effectively. This transformed the soldier. The traditional hoplite carried a large shield and fought with one arm free. The Macedonian phalangite carried a smaller shield strapped to his forearm, freeing both hands for the pike. His primary defense was no longer the shield alone, but distance in formation. 16 ranks deep, the phalanx advanced as a living forest of spear points. The first 5 ranks projected their sarissas forward, creating overlapping layers of lethal reach. An enemy charging head-on would face a bristling wall long before reaching striking distance, but the phalanx had vulnerabilities. Its long pikes were unwieldy in rough terrain. Its cohesion was essential. If flanks were exposed or formation disrupted, it could collapse rapidly. Alexander understood this. He never used the phalanx alone. The companion cavalry. The hammer, if the phalanx was the anvil. The companion cavalry was the hammer drawn from Macedonian aristocracy. These horsemen wore bronze helmets, muscle cuirasses or scale armor, and carried long thrusting spears known as zistons. Unlike Persian cavalry, they did not rely primarily on missile fire. They were shock troops. They rode in wedge formation, a triangular arrangement designed to concentrate force at a single point. At the tip of that wedge was often Alexander himself. When the phalanx pinned the enemy front, the companions would strike at the decisive moment, targeting a weak flank, command position, or a critical gap. Their objective was not attrition, it was rupture. Once a breach formed, cavalry exploited it mercilessly, high paspists and flexibility. Between the rigid phalanx and the fast-moving cavalry stood the high paspists, elite infantry. Capable of rapid maneuver, they guarded the vulnerable junction between phalanx and cavalry, adapted to uneven ground, and performed specialized assaults. In sieges, they were often first over the walls. Their equipment was lighter than that of the phalanx, but heavier than light infantry. They embodied adaptability, something rare in ancient warfare. Alexander's genius lay in coordinating these diverse units into a single integrated system, Persian arms and doctrine, across the battlefield. The forces of the Achaemenid Empire reflected centuries of imperial warfare. Persian infantry often carried wicker shields, shorter spears, and powerful composite bows, capable of penetrating armor at close range. Scale armor, made of overlapping bronze or iron. Plates protected elite units, but Persia's true strength lay in cavalry. From the plains of Central Asia to the highlands of Media, Persian horsemen were renowned for speed and skill. Many were trained in mounted archery, striking from distance, retreating before counterattack, then circling again. At Gaugamela, Darius III would deploy scythed chariots, vehicles fitted with blade extensions designed to slice through infantry formations and create panic. Persian strategy favored encirclement, their numerical Superiority allowed them to stretch lines wide, threaten flanks, and envelop opponents against traditional Greek armies. This approach could be devastating. But Alexander rarely fought. Traditionally, tactical philosophy, decisive engagement. Alexander rejected. Passive defense, he sought decisive confrontation. At the Granicus River in 334 BC, he launched a direct cavalry assault across difficult terrain, a move that stunned Persian commanders. Though nearly killed in the melee, his boldness shattered the siege. Satrapal army. At the Battle of Issus, narrow coastal terrain compressed Persian numbers, ironically repeating the kind of terrain advantage once exploited by the Greeks at Thermopylae. Darius's massive army could not fully deploy. Alexander drove toward the Persian king's position, forcing Darius to flee, but the ultimate demonstration of tactical mastery came at the Battle of Gaugamela. There on open plains, carefully prepared by Persian engineers to maximize chariot effectiveness, Alexander faced perhaps the largest army assembled against him. He did not attack blindly. Instead, he advanced obliquely, drawing Persian forces outward, stretching their line. As gaps emerged, he identified the decisive point and led a cavalry charge directly toward Darius himself. Ancient warfare often revolved around the morale of commanders. When Darius fled, cohesion collapsed. The empire cracked speed as a weapon. Beyond armor and formations, Alexander wielded one final advantage: speed. He marched rapidly, often covering astonishing distances in short time frames. He crossed deserts, scaled mountains, and pursued fleeing enemies relentlessly. His enemies struggled to predict his movements. His soldiers, though often exhausted, were driven by momentum, and the promise of plunder in ancient warfare campaigns frequently stalled for seasons. Alexander turned war into continuous motion, and with each victory the legend grew. From Asia Minor to Egypt, from Mesopotamia to the Persian heartland, cities fell, treasuries were seized. Satraps submitted. The rise of Alexander was no longer a possibility, it was a reality, but the greater his empire expanded, the more fragile it became. And soon the limits of conquest would test not only his army, but his vision of what it meant to rule the world. The rise of Alexander the Great was not a single battle. It was a relentless sequence of calculated risks, each one building upon the last, each one carrying the weight of empire. Granicus baptism by blood, 334 BC, the river. Granicus in Asia Minor was the first true test. Persian satraps positioned their cavalry along the far bank, confident that steep riverbanks and strong current would blunt any assault. Many Macedonian officers advised delay to cross at a safer point. To regroup at dawn, Alexander refused. He ordered an immediate cavalry charge directly across the river. Water churned beneath armored horses. Persian lances met Macedonian spears midstream. The struggle was chaotic, men slipping, shields clashing in confined space. At one critical moment, Alexander was nearly cut down by a Persian noble. Only the intervention of his companion Clytus saved his life. But once the Macedonian cavalry secured a foothold on the bank, the phalanx crossed behind them. Persian line fractured. Asia Minor began to fall. Greek cities under Persian control were liberated, though often placed under Macedonian oversight. Alexander framed himself not merely as conqueror, but as avenger of earlier Persian invasions of Greece. The campaign had momentum, and momentum in war is contagious. Issus, a king in flight, 333 BC. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Issus here. Darius III personally commanded a vast imperial army. Persian numbers may have exceeded 1,000, though. Ancient estimates are likely exaggerated, yet geography intervened. The narrow coastal plain near Issus compressed Darius's forces. His numerical superiority could not fully deploy. Alexander identified the key target, not the infantry, not the cavalry, but the king himself. Leading the companion cavalry in wedge formation, he drove directly toward Darius's chariot. The collision was devastating, under intense pressure. With Macedonian cavalry closing in, Darius lost his nerve. He fled. The Persian army collapsed in confusion. The royal camp, including Darius's family, fell into Macedonian hands. Psychologically, the blow was enormous. The great king had abandoned the field, and Alexander's legend grew. Tyre mastery of siege, 332 BC. Not all victories were swift. The island city of Tyre refused submission. Its walls rose directly from the sea. Its fleet was formidable. Alexander faced a challenge, unlike open battle. He responded with engineering audacity. A massive causeway was constructed from the mainland to the island under constant harassment from Tyrian ships. Siege towers rose above the waves. Naval reinforcements from newly subdued Phoenician cities tipped the balance. After 7 months, Tyre fell. The siege demonstrated that Alexander was not merely a battlefield tactician, but a strategic innovator. Resistance would be broken by land or sea. Egypt and divine kingship, 332-331 BC. With the Levant subdued, Alexander marched into Egypt. There was little resistance. The Persians were viewed as foreign rulers. Alexander was welcomed as liberator in Memphis. He was crowned pharaoh at the oracle of Siwa. He was reportedly acknowledged as son of Zeus Ammon, reinforcing his belief in divine destiny. He founded a city bearing his name, Alexandria. It would become one of the greatest cultural centers of the ancient world, but Alexander's gaze remained fixed eastward. Darius was not yet defeated. Gaugamela, the decisive blow, 331 BC. The final great confrontation unfolded at the Battle of Gaugamela. Darius prepared meticulously. The battlefield was flattened to accommodate scythed chariots. Persian forces were immense, drawn from across the empire. This time there would be no constricting terrain to limit deployment. Alexander advanced obliquely, deliberately. Stretching the Persian line, Darius extended his forces to prevent encirclement, thinning his center in the process. When the moment came, Alexander saw the gap. He led a direct cavalry charge toward Darius. The clash was thunderous. Chariots were neutralized. By disciplined infantry tactics, soldiers opening ranks to let them pass, then striking at drivers and horses. As Macedonian cavalry pierced toward the royal position, Darius fled once again. The psychological effect was catastrophic. Persian resistance. Disintegrated Babylon opened its gates. Susa fell. Persepolis, ceremonial heart of the Achaemenid Empire, was captured and later burned. Whether in calculated symbolism or drunken impulse remains debated. The empire of Cyrus and Xerxes had collapsed. Pursuit to the ends of the earth. Darius fled eastward, but was eventually betrayed and killed by his own satraps. Alexander pursued relentlessly across the Iranian plateau through Bactria and Sogdiana, adopted elements of Persian dress and court ritual, seeking to merge Macedonian and Persian elites. Resistance flared in distant provinces. Guerrilla warfare replaced open battle. Alexander responded with both brutality and diplomacy, founding cities, marrying local nobility, integrating Persian officers into his command structure. But the march did not end there. Driven by ambition and curiosity, Alexander crossed into the Indian subcontinent. At the Battle of the Hydaspes, he faced King Porus and war elephants, a new and terrifying challenge. Though victorious, his army had reached its limit. Exhausted, far from home, confronted with the vastness of India beyond the Ganges, his men refused to march further. For the first time in his career, Alexander was forced to turn back. The rise had been meteoric. The empire stretched from Greece to the Indus, but conquest has a cost, and the greatest challenge of Alexander's life would not be winning his empire. It would be holding it. By 323 BC, the empire of Alexander the Great stretched farther than any realm previously assembled by a single ruler in the Mediterranean world. From the rugged mountains of Macedon to the valleys of the Indus River, from the sands of Egypt to the cities of Mesopotamia, it was an empire forged in less than 13 years, and yet it would not outlive its creator. The final days in Babylon. After returning from India, through the brutal Gedrosian desert, where thousands perished from heat and exhaustion, Alexander arrived. In Babylon, in 323 BC, Babylon was to be his imperial capital. There he planned new campaigns, Arabia, perhaps even the Western Mediterranean. He envisioned fleets, trade routes, administrative reforms. He sought to fuse Macedonian and Persian elites into a single ruling class. Mass marriages between officers and Persian noblewomen symbolized this vision. But Alexander's relentless pace had taken its toll. In June 323 BC at the age of 30. 2. He fell ill, possibly from fever infection or complications. From accumulated wounds, ancient sources offer conflicting accounts. Modern scholars still debate the cause. After days of worsening condition, he died. When asked to whom he left his empire, he reportedly answered, "To the strongest." It was not a plan, it was a prophecy of chaos, the wars of the successors. Alexander left no adult heir capable of ruling. His half-brother Philip III was mentally impaired. His son Alexander IV was unborn at the time of his death. Power fell into the hands of his generals. The Diadochi men like Ptolemy, Isotus Seleucus I Nicator and Antigonus I Monophthalmus carved the empire into rival kingdoms. Civil war erupted. Within decades, Alexander's unified empire fractured into major Hellenistic states. The Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire across much of Asia, the Antigonid kingdom in Macedon. The dream of a single world empire dissolved, but something far more enduring remained. The Hellenistic transformation, Alexander's conquests, did not merely redraw borders, they reshaped civilization. Greek language spread from the Aegean to Central Asia. Trade routes connected distant regions. Cities founded by Alexander, especially Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of learning, science, and culture. Greek philosophy, art, and political ideas blended with Persian, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian traditions. This fusion created what historians call the Hellenistic world, an era defined not by isolation, but by exchange. Mathematics, advanced astronomy flourished, sculpture evolved. Into dynamic realism, libraries collected knowledge from across continents. Alexander had conquered through force. But his lasting legacy was cultural integration. The military legacy. On the battlefield, Alexander redefined warfare. He demonstrated the power of combined arms tactics, coordinating infantry, cavalry, and specialized units into a cohesive whole. He proved that speed and decisive action could overcome numerical inferiority. His campaigns became a model studied for centuries by Roman generals, by medieval strategists, and even by modern military thinkers. Yet his empire revealed a truth equally important. Conquest is easier than governance. An empire built on charisma can fracture when charisma vanishes, a legend beyond life in death. Alexander became myth in Egypt. He was remembered as pharaoh in Persia, as a complex and sometimes destructive conqueror in Greek tradition, as a new Achilles in later Eastern literature. He appeared as a heroic explorer at the edge of the world. Stories exaggerated his deeds. Legends placed him in distant lands beyond historical reach. His life became a bridge between history and epic. Few men have so completely blurred that boundary. The measure of greatness was Alexander great because he conquered, because he spread Hellenic culture, because he dared what others deemed impossible. Perhaps his greatness lies not merely in the territory he seized, but in the transformation he unleashed. The collapse of the Achaemenid Empire ended one era, the birth of the Hellenistic world began another, and though his empire fragmented, the cultural currents he set in motion shaped the Mediterranean and Near East for centuries, influencing Rome, influencing early Christianity, influencing the intellectual foundations of the Western world. Alexander's life was brief. His ambition was boundless. His empire did not endure, but his impact did. From the hills of Macedon to the deserts of Babylon, his name still echoes, not merely as a king, but as a turning point in history. Thank you for watching. Alexander the Great once said, "There is nothing impossible to him who will try." His empire fell, but his ambition reshaped the world. See you in the next story of history.